I'm Matt Horning. I'm a UX strategist and developer here at Rock & Bloom. My role here at Rock & Bloom for at least the past 4 years has been as a developer. So what I do mostly is code. Anything that we do here for clients, which is very wide-ranging, just building anything they need. Anything that kind of relies on technology really is what I do. Conversely, from a UX strategist perspective, UX meaning user experience, what I'm trying to do is create a seamless experience for anybody who's using our products. An example I like to use is an iPhone. If you give an iPhone to a 3-year-old or to a 20-year-old or to an 85-year-old, they tend to have the same experience, and that's because that experience has been created or crafted by somebody. Somebody has thought about how this person or any person is going to use this device. And creating a seamless experience for any type of person or entity that happens to use it is really important. And that, ultimately is just going to increase engagement and increase usability for anybody and for our clients. So that's what I try to focus on. I mean, you could describe us technically as a digital agency, but ultimately what we're trying to do is solve problems for businesses. And whether that problem is from a marketing perspective, from a branding perspective, or from a digital asset perspective, that's sort of the world which we try to navigate. So if we're trying to increase your presence online, if we're trying to increase the visibility of your brand, if we're trying to better establish who you are, or as a company, like your personality, that's something that we could help with. So if you're a brand, are you somebody who's trying to serve a niche audience, or are you more of a mass appeal? Are you creative, or are you more kind of laid back, or more sophisticated in what your brand messaging is? We look at a project at large, we see what's most important or what's sort of next up, and then we just tackle that kind of piece by piece. In the same way that someone might build a house, you try to compartmentalize, or you try to break down building that house into small steps. And we essentially try to do that same thing with programming. It's really hard to look at something as a whole and know where to go next. Like if you were to tell somebody, build a car, where would you start? In the same way, if somebody asks us to build an application, like I need an application to sell pizza, where do you start? That's kind of what we try to figure out. We break that down into small, easy steps, and we tackle that sort of one by one. In our workplace here, we work in an Agile environment, which essentially just means we break our work down into sprints, and a sprint is about a week long. And then at the end of every week, we just kind of just retrospective, or we look back and say what worked, what didn't, what did we get done, what did we not get done. We try to fix anything that maybe is in our way, and then we just keep going. We go to the next week. I started by going to university for cellular biology, and I did my degree thinking that I was going to go into research and I was going to, solve some sort of problem until I did my master's for about a month. And then I immediately was like, this is definitely not for me. Ultimately, I just realized I liked solving problems. And that sort of just led me back to computer science. And at the same time, growing up, I was always on computers, near computers, knowing how to use them, really trying to find those intricacies with it, until a friend of mine kind of was just like, you do this all the time, why don't you just do that for a job? But sometimes growing up in a smaller city, or in a place where that doesn't necessarily happen in front of you, it doesn't really click in that that's a job. That's something that you can do. You grow up thinking, okay, I can be an engineer, a doctor, or a lawyer, and those are kind of the big career paths in front of you, and you try to navigate the space in between them, and then you move to a different city and you realize you can be anything you want, and that has a million different variations. So I ended up going back to school for 2 more years, thinking that I would transition from that science background into more of a bioinformatics role, where I could still do research and I could still kind of be in that space that I thought I liked, and I do, I'm still interested in it. But suddenly I found out about their internship program at the U of S. That program led me into looking at what companies were involved. I ended up getting an internship, and suddenly I was in a space where I was creating and problem solving, but just not in what I expected, or not how I expected. Suddenly I was working in this digital world where I was using computers how I had never used them before, and still kind of scratching that problem solving itch that I had. And I just liked it. I just kind of fell in love with it, and here I am almost 10 years later, still kind of doing that same thing and just trying to solve problems. Trying to navigate into the world of UX and user experience and strategy, honestly, we're currently in a position where that's changing. That wouldn't have been a career path in terms of going to university and going into your UX class. That being said, probably in the last 3 years, that's really changed. There are now courses that are specifically dedicated to this. The world of user experiences really sort of exploded in the past, I would say 5 to 8 years, really because there was always a disconnect between technology and psychology, and that seems like two really separate worlds, but at the end of the day, to make a successful product, you have to create something that people are going to use, and if you don't understand how people use things, you're not going to make a successful product. And so suddenly those worlds start to bridge, where in a website world, for example, you have approximately 2 seconds before a user gets disinterested in your website. So if you're searching on Google for, let's say, backpacks, and you're just looking for a new backpack, you click the first link. If that link doesn't load within 2 seconds, almost 90% of people will just go back and they'll try the next link. So if you're that company with a slow-loading website, that severely impacts your ability to do business. It's not something that you think of, but when you understand the psychology of the task switching in your brain, where if something's just not doing what you expect, or you don't see that something's happening, your brain immediately switches context and thinks, I'm going to do something else. I'm going to go somewhere else. I love a lot of things about this role. I mean, getting into technology in general, or getting into programming, you really have to have a love for solving problems, one, like I said before, but also, depending on where you work, you kind of have to be a type of person who is comfortable being sort of on the edge of their seat or sort of on your toes, because one, your work is going to look differently depending on what client you're working on. Obviously, if you're working at a different company where you're working on your own stuff, that becomes a different issue. But for us, being on our toes and constantly having to do something new, it's exciting. It's fun. That being said, it is also stressful. It has the pros and cons for sure. So you have to be someone who's aware of that and think to yourself, do I want to be on my toes all the time? Because the client work is one thing, but also the technology is another. And programming and tech is something that changes, quite frankly, daily. You can come into work, suddenly a library or a plugin or something that you use is now been deprecated, or they've moved on to something else, and you have to be able to suddenly pick up that new thing, incorporate it into your workflow, and keep going. And that can be very frustrating. Qualities for programming, problem solving obviously is the big one, is having that need or that want to take something apart and put it back together, and hopefully in a better way if necessary. But that's the biggest thing for sure. As well, there's kind of this weird sense of language with programming where you code, and so you're working in a different language. Instead of marketing where you're quite physically working with like an English language or whatever your native language is. For programming, you're just kind of speaking to a computer in a way that makes no sense to anybody else, and that has to kind of be enjoyable for you. If you go to a programming class and suddenly you're just typing a lot of symbols and that's interesting, then great, then you're in the right place. But if not, it's going to be really tough. The job market for us, quite frankly, is on one hand, it's relatively infinite. I mean, every company has some level of technology that they required, but at the same time, in our world, everything is just becoming more and more sort of entrenched in the world of technology. So no matter what industry you're in, there is some way to incorporate technology into it. If you're looking to get into programming in general, I mean, now is more as perfect a time as any. Programming is so variable in the way that you might want to attack something, and if you were to just type in programming, there's the rabbit hole that you could go down is so massive. I would say, think about where in programming you might want to learn. Do you want to build websites? Do you want to build applications? Do you want to make games? Do you want to program, hardware devices? Find an area of the world that you want to make an impact in, and then think, how can I use technology to better that?